It is 3:12 in the morning on the 8th of February 1944, and the air inside your Quonset hut at RAF Bassingbourn feels sharper than glass. The single pot-bellied stove in the corner has gone out again, leaving only the faint metallic smell of last night's coal smoke. Condensation beads on the curved metal walls, freezing into small translucent scales that glitter under the dim red bulb near the door. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters a prayer he never finishes. Outside, a ground vehicle backfires once, its sound carried across the wet fields of Cambridgeshire. Before we continue with this story, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Are you in bed trying to drift off, or perhaps studying late into the night? Drop a comment below and let me know your location. And if you enjoy these detailed historical journeys, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future stories. Now let's return to the chill of that Quonset hut, where the morning has only just begun. The routine is always the same. A knock at the door, then the voice of the orderly shouting names from a clipboard. You pull on wool socks, trousers still damp from yesterday's fog, and the heavy A2 flight jacket that smells faintly of machine oil. The hut's floor, made of warped plywood, creaks under the weight of 12 men, all dressing at once. The low murmur of talk centers on one question everyone already knows the answer to: are we going up today? In February 1944, the 91st Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force was flying deep penetration raids into Germany. B-17s, the flying fortresses, rose from a dozen fields across eastern England each morning like migrating birds made of aluminum. At this hour, the countryside slept, but inside the base, more than 2,000 people were already at work. Armourers wheeling carts of 500-pound bombs across tarmac, slick with frost. Clerks typing weather bulletins, cooks cracking eggs by the hundreds. Mission days began long before dawn. You step outside, boots crunching the frozen gravel. The airfield is cloaked in a pale mist, faintly illuminated by blue blackout lamps. You can smell avgas and wet grass, a mixture so familiar that it hardly registers anymore. In the distance, generators hum steadily. Their rhythm is the pulse of the base. A jeep passes, headlights dimmed to narrow slits, carrying 2 officers toward group operations. They disappear into the fog like ghosts of efficiency. At the mess hall, yellow light spills from steamed-up windows. Inside, the warmth is sudden, almost dizzying. Tin trays clatter, and the line moves slowly past a long counter. The menu never changes: powdered eggs, bacon if the supply ships have come in, toast spread with margarine that refuses to melt, and coffee so strong it could strip paint. The airmen eat in near silence. Conversation tends to slow as the hour of takeoff approaches. The body needs fuel. The mind prefers quiet. At another table, ground crewmen talk softly about an oil leak they found on Old Faithful, one of the older fortresses. They discuss torque settings and gasket seals, their voices measured, their hands moving as if holding invisible wrenches. Routine keeps everyone calm. For the ball turret gunner, your position the meal is heavier than most. You know that once you climb into that plexiglass sphere, you won't move for the next 10 hours. Every calorie matters. You swallow the last mouthful of coffee, feeling its bitter heat linger on your tongue. By 3:55 a.m., a loudspeaker crackles. All aircrew for briefing. Trays are abandoned mid-bite. Men pull on gloves, helmets tucked under arms, and file out into the cold again. The operations building stands half a mile away, a squat structure with blackout curtains drawn tight. Inside, rows of wooden chairs face a large map of Europe pinned to a corkboard. Coloured strings trace air routes, red for outbound, blue for return. A curtain covers the day's objective. The air smells of chalk dust and damp wool. At exactly 4:10, the curtain is pulled aside. The target is displayed in plain block letters: Regensburg, aircraft factories. A murmur passes through the room, followed by stillness. The operations officer begins reading. Weather forecasts over the channel, anticipated enemy flak concentrations near Frankfurt, estimated fighter resistance. The words are delivered without emphasis, like a recipe everyone must memorize. The briefing lasts nearly an hour. Each crewman takes notes on a small pad: altitudes, waypoints, emergency fields. The navigator sketches wind drift. The radio operator copies call signs. You, the ball turret gunner, have fewer details to record, but listen closely all the same. When the lights dim, a film projector clicks on. Grainy reconnaissance photos flicker on the wall: hangars, assembly sheds, rail sidings. The speaker points with a stick, tracing approach headings. Flak expected here and here. The tone remains calm, procedural. You could almost mistake it for a classroom lesson, except that every mark on the map represents someone's possible last sight on Earth. After the main briefing, smaller groups form by squadron. The 324th gathers in a side room. The commanding officer, Major Clarence Kramer, reads weather data again and hands out the target folders. His voice is level, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Gentlemen, engine start at 0600, taxi by 0620. Good luck. That phrase, good luck, is both blessing and ritual, never delivered with exclamation, always the same monotone. Outside, dawn is still hours away. The airfield hums with preparation. Mechanics in heavy coveralls move between planes with flashlights strapped to their chests. The B-17s sit in neat rows, their noses painted with names like Heavenly Days and Short Snorter. Steam rises from their exhausts as preheaters warm the oil. You approach your aircraft serial 4231812, Mary Jane III. Frost clings to her wings, catching the light of a single sodium lamp. Pre-flight inspection is methodical. You circle the aircraft with your pilot and engineer, ticking items off a clipboard. Control surfaces free, de-icers checked, oxygen bottles full, ammunition loaded. The ball turret, hanging beneath the fuselage like a transparent sphere, receives special attention. You run a gloved hand over its perspex shell, feeling where yesterday's flak fragment left a faint scratch. Inside, the twin 50 caliber M2 Brownings gleam with fresh oil. Ammunition belts feed from curved chutes, 500 rounds per gun. The foot pedals that rotate the turret are cold metal, slick with condensation. Climbing aboard through the rear hatch, you move carefully along the narrow catwalk. The smell of hydraulic fluid mingles with gun oil and the faint sweetness of de-icing glycol. In the radio compartment, wires snake along the ceiling like vines. The interphone buzzes as the engineer tests connections.
Check ball turret.
You plug in your throat mic and answer. Check. The sound of your own voice echoes back, tinny but reassuring. Crew positions are small worlds unto themselves. The pilot and co-pilot up front share the view. The navigator and bombardier sit behind a curtain of instruments. The waist gunners have small windows, the tail gunner his cramped kingdom. The ball turret, though, is different. It is isolation perfected. To enter it, you must crouch at the open hatch, swing your legs into the sphere, and lower yourself until knees bend beside the twin guns. Once inside, the hatch is closed from outside. You are effectively sealed away, suspended between sky and earth. Before boarding fully, you run through the ritual of dressing. First, the long underwear, then the electrically heated suit, a web of wires running through fabric, connected to a small plug near your hip. Over that, the fleece-lined flight suit, then flak vest, parachute harness, boots with heating elements, silk gloves under leather ones, oxygen mask hanging ready around your neck. Each item has a reason, each layer a response to the cold of 30,000 feet. Veterans say that to fly without one of them is to invite frostbite or worse. At 5:40 a.m., the sky begins to pale faintly in the east. Trucks arrive carrying the last of the crew gear: May West vests, parachutes, escape kits containing silk maps and chocolate. Armourers roll the final bomb carts beneath the open bays, 10 500-pounders secured by steel shackles. You watch as they arm the fuses, each turn of the wrench deliberate. There is no haste. War at this level is made of procedures. Meanwhile, the control tower flashes a green signal. Engine start. One by one, the Wright Cyclone R1820 radials come alive, coughing clouds of exhaust that hang low before dispersing. The roar builds across the field until conversation is impossible. You fasten your helmet and lean against the fuselage, feeling the vibration through your spine. The prop wash carries the smell of gasoline and burnt oil, oddly comforting after months of exposure. In the cockpit, gauges flicker to life oil pressure, manifold temperature, RPM, all within limits. The engineer calls out each value, the pilot responds, the co-pilot repeats. The intercom hums with routine language, checklists, confirmations, small corrections. You sit beside the open hatch, watching ground crew remove the wheel chocks. Dawn creeps higher, revealing faint contrails from earlier test flights. As the formation begins to taxi, the field transforms into motion. Giant machines roll slowly along narrow tracks of pierced steel planking, wings nearly overlapping. The smell of hot engines mixes with the damp scent of grass. Pilots keep precise spacing, guided by small lanterns on the taxiway edges. The control tower blinks a steady pattern. Red hold, green go. Everything moves according to a system that has been practiced countless times, yet still feels uncertain each morning. Inside your aircraft, the temperature rises slightly. Condensation drips from the ceiling. The intercom crackles again. All crew, check in! Voices respond one by one. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, top turret, radio, waist, tail, ball. Your own voice joins the list last, quiet but clear. Ball turret ready. The pilot acknowledges with a single word. Copy. Outside, the first bombers reach the runway threshold. Engines throttle up to 2,500 RPM, propellers blur, and one after another they lift into the pale morning, leaving faint trails of exhaust that drift sideways in the wind. Each departure is timed to the second. Crews inside remain mostly silent, eyes on instruments, hands steady. For you, the next step is both familiar and final. Lowering yourself into the turret before takeoff, locking the hatch, testing the traverse and elevation motors. You glance once toward the horizon, the faintest hint of sunrise over the flat fields, and then down to the gleaming plexiglass sphere waiting below. A ground mechanic helps guide your feet into the narrow opening. The harness clicks, the cables hum, and the small motor whines as the turret rotates through its first test arc. From this moment until landing, your world will measure scarcely 4 feet in diameter. The engines roar steadily now, their vibration settling into the bones of the aircraft like a living heartbeat. The pilot calls out, "Run up complete, throttles advance." The Fortress begins to roll, heavy at first, then lighter as speed builds. You feel the slight shudder as the landing gear leaves the earth, the sudden smoothness that follows. Beneath you, the airfield falls away rows of huts, narrow lanes, tiny moving dots of people. England becomes a patchwork of frost-white fields disappearing under cloud. You take a slow breath, adjust your oxygen mask, and rest your gloved hands on the handles of the guns. There is no turning back now, not for many hours. The intercom carries the calm voice of the pilot. Forming up at 10,000. You answer with a single word. Roger. The hum of engines merges into a constant note that feels almost like silence. The horizon brightens as the sun breaks through the overcast, painting the aluminum wings in soft gold. You glance around at the narrow space enclosing you, the gauges, the sight. The cold glass inches from your face and realize you will not leave this place again until they return. If they return, and yet the mission has barely begun. Ahead lies the long process of joining formation with 300 other bombers, a slow dance through morning haze that will take the next 2 hours. You can still hear the vibration from the engines long after the wheels leave the runway. The whole aircraft hums with a kind of mechanical certainty. The takeoff itself is already forgotten. There is only altitude now, and the slow, unending climb into thin, freezing air. You are locked into your position, suspended beneath the belly of the B-17 like a thought no one wants to speak aloud. The ground has vanished beneath you. The world has become noise, glass, and cold metal. The first hour is ascent. The bomber circles to join its formation, the other fortresses appearing as grey dots against the faint morning light. Condensation trails form in straight white lines behind them, perfect and endless. Inside the turret, the air begins to grow thinner. Every breath feels mechanical through the mask. The heated flight suit hums softly, its wires warming your limbs in pulses. Your knees touch the armor plate. Your shoulders rest against curved glass. There is no room to stretch. You become part of the machine. At 30,000 feet, the world is colorless. Clouds flatten beneath the formation like a solid floor. The sky above is a pale blue that never changes. The turret rotates smoothly with a steady hydraulic sigh. Through the twin handles, your hands guide two 50 caliber Browning machine guns, each weighing about 60 pounds. The ammunition feeds in long belts from boxes above, clicking softly as they slide through the chutes. You keep checking the feed, the pressure gauge, the oxygen flow. Everything has to work. Nothing must fail. Your voice crackles through the intercom. Ball turret operational. The pilot answers with a calm, clipped tone. No one says much else. Conversation is spare at altitude. The engines drone at a single note that never ends. It's not sound anymore, it's a presence, a vibration that becomes part of your body. Even your heartbeat starts to follow it. Every 30 minutes, you rotate the turret a few degrees just to keep circulation moving. You test the foot pedals, the trigger switches, the sighting reticle. The glass slowly frosts over at the edges where the heated panel can't quite reach. Your breath condenses against the oxygen mask, freezing when you exhale. You wipe it with the back of a glove, careful not to scratch the lens. This is your world now, 3 feet in every direction. Curved glass, twin barrels, the endless sky. Time passes slowly, almost imperceptibly. You can't tell if it's been 1 hour or 3. The horizon never changes. Occasionally, a sliver of sunlight flashes across another bomber's wingtip. And you remember, there are hundreds of men out here, all doing the same thing, sitting, waiting, breathing through rubber and ice. Inside the formation, the radio operator reads coordinates in fragments. The navigator checks drift. The pilot trims the engines to keep the speed constant, 180 miles per hour indicated, a little less in the thin air. Below, Europe rolls by unseen under the clouds. You are part of a convoy that stretches for miles. To look down through the glass is to see nothing but the faint shadow of your own aircraft moving across cloud. Sometimes the clouds break, and you catch glimpses of rivers frozen like veins, or small towns dusted in snow. They slide away beneath you, silent and unreachable. You start to understand why some gunners called it the loneliest place in the world. It's not the danger, it's the stillness. The isolation feels complete. No one can see you unless they crawl down and open the hatch. Even then, your knees are pulled to your chest. You couldn't turn around if you tried. The turret hums on hydraulics, always obedient, always mechanical. It never cares who sits inside. You test the trigger briefly, just a mechanical click with the safeties on. The sound is swallowed instantly by the engines. You glance at the gauges again. Turret pressure steady at 1200 psi. Oxygen flow normal. Ammunition belt smooth. Everything exact, everything routine. The cold seeps through anyway, creeping in through seams and rivets. At 30,000 feet, it's 40 degrees below zero. Without the heated suit, you'd be unconscious in minutes. The gloves, the boots, the layers of wool, they only slow the loss of warmth. You can feel it in your fingers when you adjust the handles. Sometimes, during long missions, frost forms on the inside of the dome, thin and white, like lace. You stare at it for a while because it gives you something to look at besides the void. You imagine you're inside a snow globe, only this one hums and shakes and smells faintly of oil. Hours pass. The formation levels off over the North Sea, then turns east toward Germany. The intercom buzzes with short commands, course corrections, altitude checks, words reduced to syllables by static. You reply automatically. Training takes over where thought ends. You know the checklist by heart gun safeties off at the IP. Check arcs, scan for fighters, maintain sector coverage. Every command rehearsed hundreds of times on the ground. At these altitudes, the sky seems peaceful, but the peace is deceptive. You know what lies ahead. Flak belts, heavy batteries, dark clouds of metal fragments that fill the air faster than sight can follow. Still, you breathe in, breathe out, and focus on the sight ahead of you. The guns point slightly downward, ready but quiet. The next hour drifts by in fragments of motion and sound. You check the cloud layer again. You adjust the heater, rheostat. You stretch your fingers. The pilot reports, crossing the Rhine. Somewhere below, invisible in the haze, the ground begins to fire back. Flak doesn't come all at once. It starts as distant black specks, small and slow, like smoke drifting upward. Then seconds later, the sky begins to bloom with it. Each burst is about the size of a truck, full of jagged steel. They hang in the air just long enough for you to see them before the wind scatters the smoke. The sound reaches you a moment later, muffled pops, felt more than heard through the airframe. The whole bomber shudders, not violently, just persistently, as if the air has turned to gravel. You call out over the intercom, "Flak, 9 o'clock low." The pilot answers calmly. The navigator marks the position. Everyone stays on task. No one looks up or down too long. Focus is everything. Inside the turret, each shock feels amplified. The glass trembles. Bits of frost fall from the ceiling and drift past your mask. You keep rotating, scanning, methodical. There's no fear in it, only procedure. Every move deliberate, controlled. You are watching the sky for shapes that don't belong, for thin streaks of condensation that curve instead of running straight, for the silver glint of wings in sunlight. You see none yet? Hours pass. Your back begins to ache where it presses against the armor plate. You try to adjust, but there's nowhere to go. You wiggle your toes to keep blood moving. You tap the oxygen gauge again, still steady. The heated suit hums on, though you can barely feel it anymore. You glance upward through the glass to where the fuselage joins your turret. The metal looks thin from this angle, paper-thin, vibrating. Above that is the bomb bay, full of 500-pounders held in racks. You can't see them, but you know their weight. Every few seconds, the plane shifts slightly as the load moves with turbulence. Some gunners tried to distract themselves by counting bursts of flak. You do too. 1, 2, 3, until the numbers blur into rhythm. Each burst is at a different distance, some below, some behind. You try to predict the next one. You never can. At intervals, you check in with the crew. The pilot sounds composed. The radio operator reads off bearings. The navigator's voice is quiet and exact, like a man reading from a textbook. The bombardier is silent, concentrating on his sight, waiting for the moment he'll take over the plane for the drop. You listen to their voices like a thread back to the world. Without that sound, you'd have no proof that anyone else exists. You look again through the sight. Clouds below. A few gaps showing patches of dark earth, river lines, small flashes of light reflections from flak bursts, or perhaps from other formations. Hard to tell at this distance. Everything up here looks slow, even when it's not. There's a certain illusion that takes hold after several hours, that you're not moving at all. The plane feels still, suspended. Only the vibration reminds you otherwise. You remember that at this speed, about 150 knots true, you're crossing hundreds of miles. Yet nothing changes. It's a kind of stillness that wears you down, gently but relentlessly. After 4 hours, fatigue begins to creep in. Not sleepiness, just a slow dullness that seeps into thought. You check your instruments more often to keep focus. Turret hydraulics stable, oil temperature normal. Ammunition count unchanged. Everything by the book. Another burst rocks the formation. A metallic sound echoes through the fuselage shrapnel hitting somewhere forward. You report it on the intercom. The pilot acknowledges. No one raises their voice. You imagine a small dent in the aluminum skin, a hole perhaps the size of a coin. You picture the ground crews later, patching it with dull silver tape. You adjust your position again, careful not to tug on the oxygen hose. It snakes from the side wall above your left shoulder, connected to the system running along the fuselage. You trace it with your eyes for a moment, noting frost gathering near the clamp. The airflow still sounds strong. You file it away mentally. Routine. At times like this, you start to think in numbers. Altitude 29,800 feet. Air temperature -40. Indicated airspeed 180 mph, engine RPM steady at 2,300. 4 Wright Cyclone R1820-97 engines, each delivering with 200 horsepower. Weight of aircraft about 54,000 pounds. Guns, twin 50 cals with 500 rounds each. You recite these figures in your head like a mantra. Numbers make sense when nothing else does. 5 hours in. Target approaching! The intercom comes alive again. Voices checking synchronizations, bomb doors tested. The smell of heated electronics fills the air. You glance toward the horizon where the sun has climbed higher, washing everything in cold silver light. The sky looks too beautiful for what it contains. Flak density increases. You can see patterns now, rows of bursts at different altitudes, like invisible hands trying to reach the formation. You stay focused on your sector. Occasionally, another bomber wobbles slightly as it takes a near miss, but they hold formation. Discipline is everything here. You can feel your legs stiffening. You shift weight carefully to ease the strain. Every movement slow, economical. The turret responds instantly to the foot pedals. You become so attuned to it that it feels like an extension of your own body. Metal and bone, machine and thought. Through the intercom, someone mutters about cold. Another asks for a repeat on the course correction. Static fills the gaps between words. The sound of your own breathing dominates your ears, steady, rhythmic, amplified by the mask. In, out, in, out. It's almost hypnotic. The bombardier reports sighting the IP initial point before the final run. The formation adjusts course. You feel the slight bank as the aircraft turns east. Everything inside shifts a little. You tighten your grip on the handles. The guns move with you. Outside, the flak grows thicker, black flowers blooming against the endless white of cloud. You glance upward again at the oxygen line. Frost has thickened there, crystals spreading along the tubing. You note it, but the flow still feels strong. The gauge reads normal. You turn back to your sight. Below, the bomb bay doors open with a faint metallic groan. You can feel the change in vibration through the frame air, rushing differently now. The whole plane seems lighter, ready for its task. Through the sight, you catch a glimpse of the target area, dark smudges of factories, rail yards, smoke. You see bursts of flak, endless and methodical. One explodes near enough that you flinch instinctively, though the armor holds. Fragments rattle against the underside like hail. You breathe slower to steady yourself. Then it happens, a burst slightly above and to your left. You see it first as a flash, then feel the concussion through the structure. For a moment, nothing seems wrong. Then you hear a sharp hiss behind you. You glance up. The oxygen line above the turret shudders, white frost racing along its length. The flow sound changes pitch lower, strained. You reach for the intercom switch. Pilot oxygen line hit. Losing pressure, your voice sounds thin, distant in your own ears. The frost spreads faster, crawling like ivy. You try again. Ball turret, oxygen line frozen. The words trail off as your breath catches. The mask stiffens with cold. You tap the gauge needles, dropping. The intercom fills with static. You can still see the gauges flicker, still feel the plane vibrating steadily above you. But the sound fades, first the engines, then the intercom, then everything else. The last thing you notice is the frost on the hose turning from white to glassy blue, and the faint reflection of your own eyes in the curved glass before everything goes silent. When you wake, it feels like you've been gone for years. The oxygen hiss is gone, replaced by a dull hum, the sound of engines throttled back, descending. Someone's voice crackles faintly in your ears, distorted, fading in and out through the intercom. You can't make out words at first. Then slowly, the sound sharpens. Bull turret report status. You open your mouth, but no words come. You try again, a rasp this time, a whisper through frost and fatigue. Operational, you manage. The pilot doesn't reply immediately. You hear a faint click, then a calm answer. Roger, we're on the return leg. Hold steady, you blink against the glass. The horizon has changed color. The light is softer now, the harsh brightness of altitude replaced by a diffused grey. You can see the ocean again, faint reflections on its surface, and the pattern of contrails stretching back toward the continent. The sky is clearing. The worst is behind you. Inside the turret, the air feels heavier as the bomber descends. The frost begins to melt, forming small beads of water that slide down the glass. You flex your fingers, feeling the stiffness return to flesh. The heater is still running, but unevenly. You test the oxygen again. The gauge flickers uncertainly, then stabilizes. There's enough flow to last until landing. Your whole body aches in slow, deep waves. 10 hours of vibration, of cold, of silence, it settles in your bones. You stop trying to stretch or shift. Every movement feels like it belongs to someone else. Below you, England grows out of the cloud deck fields, and roads arranged in patterns that look impossibly neat after hours of emptiness. The formation begins to separate now, one by one. The bombers peel off gently, banking away in wide arcs. It's a quiet practiced ritual. No cheering, no words, just the long descent toward home. The radio operator reports landing sequence. The base controller's voice comes through, calm, clipped, almost emotionless. You imagine him in the control tower, watching dots appear through the haze. To him, this is routine. To you, it feels like something larger, heavier, though you can't explain why. As the pilot lowers flaps, the airframe changes tone. The roar of the engines deepens, the vibration shifting from high hum to low tremor. You can hear the wheels unlock, the hydraulic whine of landing gear extending. For a brief moment, the wind howls louder against the turret, and you see the ground rushing closer. Then there's the gentle, uneven thud of tires meeting runway. The bomber bounces once, then settles. It's over. The turret slows to a stop as you release the foot pedals. You pull the handles back to neutral and flip the safety lever. The hydraulic hiss fades to silence. You wait for the signal to exit, listening to the creak of cooling metal, the sighs of the crew above moving in their positions. The world feels strange now, too quiet, too still. You hear your own breathing again, steady but heavy. A tap comes from above the signal. You unlatch the turret door, move it outward, and reach for the interior grips. The motion is slow, deliberate, every joint stiff. The air that rushes in smells of oil and cold aluminum. You climb up through the opening into the fuselage. The space feels enormous after hours in the turret, though it's barely wide enough to stand. The waist gunners are already coiling ammunition belts, their faces pale and distant. The radio operator is logging final coordinates, pencil trembling slightly in his gloved hand. No one speaks much. Voices are low measured. The adrenaline is gone, replaced by the dull exhaustion that always follows survival. The pilot cuts the engines. The silence that follows is profound. You can still feel the vibration in your chest, even though it's stopped. For a few moments, no one moves. Then slowly, the crew gathers their gear: oxygen masks, flak vests, heated suits. The sound of buckles and zippers fills the space like quiet punctuation. You descend from the bomber into the chill afternoon air. The runway smells faintly of fuel and frost. A few mechanics wave you toward the dispersal hut. You nod but don't speak. The ground feels unsteady, like it's still moving beneath you. It always does after a long mission. On the hard stand nearby, ground crews swarm over returning aircraft. They work with silent efficiency, checking wings, counting bullet holes, inspecting engines. You glance back at your plane. The underside is streaked with soot, where the flak burst scorched it. One of the crew chiefs touches the frost-damaged oxygen line, shakes his head slightly, and scribbles a note on his clipboard. You watch without comment. They'll fix it before the next flight. They always do. Inside the debriefing room, warmth and noise return in small increments. The smell of coffee paper and sweat. The sound of typewriters and muted voices. You sit at a long wooden table beside the others, the surface scarred from years of use. An intelligence officer stands at the front, map behind him, pencil poised. His questions are simple, methodical. Flak concentration. Enemy fighters sighted. Bomb load released. Each man answers in turn. You speak only when addressed, your words slow, deliberate. When they ask about your position, you mention the oxygen line. The officer nods, writes a note, and moves on. It's recorded somewhere now, a line in a report that will be filed and forgotten. To you, it was the whole world for a few minutes. To them, it's just data. After the debrief, you remove the flight gear in the locker hut. The heated suit peels away stiffly, still holding its shape. Your undershirt is damp with sweat despite the cold. You hang the gear carefully on its hook, as regulations require. Every item inspected, recorded, tagged. Nothing is personal here. Everything belongs to the service. Outside, the sky has dimmed. It's late afternoon. The next shift of crews is already assembling, some for night flights, some for maintenance. You pass them quietly. Faces nod, eyes tired, expressions unreadable. They know what you've just done. You know what they will do next. No one needs to speak it aloud. In the mess hall, dinner is waiting: lukewarm stew, bread, tea, thick with sugar. You eat slowly, not from hunger but habit. The warmth feels foreign in your stomach. Around you, conversations are muted. Someone laughs once briefly, then stops. The sound doesn't carry far in the low room. On one wall, a chalkboard lists returning aircraft. Beside some numbers are check marks. Beside others, nothing yet. No one looks at it for long. After eating, you walk across the field toward the crew quarters. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and damp earth. The barracks huts line the perimeter like small, rounded shadows. Inside, the heat from the stove is faint but real. You unlace your boots slowly, fingers clumsy from fatigue. The cot creaks as you sit. For the first time in hours, you can stretch your legs. In one corner, a radio plays quietly. BBC News, in distinct words about weather, over the channel, and the progress of convoys. It feels distant, unrelated to the world you just came from. You listen anyway because silence feels heavier. Later, the flight surgeon visits the hut. He checks each man briefly, flashlight flicking over eyes, fingers pressing pulse points. His clipboard fills with short notes. Oxygen deprivation, minor frostbite, recommend rest. You nod when he speaks, though the words hardly register. Rest is a strange concept here. It comes in fragments, not hours. When he leaves, you lie back and stare at the curved ceiling. The metal still hums faintly with the day's chill. The mind keeps replaying the sound of flak bursts, the steady breathing in the mask, the slow turn of the turret. It's not fear that keeps you awake. It's habit. The noise has imprinted itself so deeply that silence feels unnatural. A few bunks away, someone murmurs in his sleep, half words, half breath. The stove pops softly as coal shifts inside. You close your eyes, but the vibration is still there, phantom-like, in the bones of your fingers. Morning comes without transition. The sound of trucks outside, the distant rumble of engines warming for another day. The world resets itself. You swing your legs over the side of the cot, pull on your boots and sit for a moment in the grey half-light. The clock above the door reads 04:10, the same time as yesterday. The same routine, always. In the mess, breakfast is the same: 2 eggs, powdered and pale, bacon crisp from the grill, coffee strong enough to burn. The talk is minimal. Someone mentions weather reports, another jokes about mail delivery. Everything ordinary, everything precise. That's how it works. Repetition keeps the mind steady. Later, you file your post-mission report in the operations room. The clerk stamps it without looking up. On the wall nearby, a new list has appeared. Mission totals by crew. You scan down until you find your name. 23 completed, 2 to go. You stand for a moment, staring at the number, then step away. Outside, the airfield stretches quiet again, frost shining on the grass between runways. Ground crews move between parked aircraft, checking panels, refueling, loading belts of ammunition. You watch one team working beneath a wing, patching holes with silver tape. The rhythm of their tools is steady, almost peaceful. They hardly look up as another engine coughs to life across the field. You walk closer to your plane. The same frost-damaged oxygen line lies on the ground now, coiled neatly beside a toolbox. One of the mechanics nods at you. "Got lucky," he says softly, then returns to work. You don't answer. You run a hand along the cold metal of the fuselage instead. The surface feels solid, indifferent. There's a strange calm in knowing the routine won't change. Another mission will come. Another early morning, another breakfast, another climb into the same narrow glass sphere. Each time feels separate, yet they blur together until even memory can't tell them apart. That's how the war continues, not in heroics, but in repetition, in the small, persistent act of doing the same impossible thing over and over, because that's what's required. Later, in the briefing room, a new map is already pinned to the board. Different target, same route. The crews gather quietly. The officer clears his throat. You sit where you always do, second row from the back, hands folded. You listen, take notes, nod when needed. The words pass through you like familiar wind. You don't need to think. You just need to go. As you leave, you glance at the flight schedule posted near the door. Tomorrow's date, same crew listed, same aircraft number. Someone has drawn a small mark beside your name, a faint check, almost invisible. You know what it means. Another mission accounted for. Another to come. The air outside smells of oil and frost again. Engines idle somewhere in the distance. You look up at the empty sky, pale and endless, and for a moment it's hard to believe that within a few hours it will be filled with sound again. The sound of 4 engines, the hum of hydraulics, the cold breath of altitude. You turn back toward the barracks, footsteps slow on the frozen ground. The day is almost identical to the one before. That's the strange comfort of it. Routine holds the mind steady. Repetition feels safe, even when it isn't. You reach the door, pause, and glance back once more at the runway. The bomber sits quietly in its dispersal bay, frost beginning to form along its wings. Tomorrow the engines will melt it away. Tomorrow the same hum will return. He'd done this 23 times, and tomorrow they'd do it again. You were trained to trust the machine. Before you ever saw Europe, before you felt the bite of high altitude, there was the long, humid stretch of Gulfport, Mississippi, a field of gleaming aluminum under southern sun. Rows of half-disassembled engines sat on stands like open hearts. You learned their language there: pressure, temperature, mixture, torque. The instructors called you the ship's conscience. Not a pilot, not quite a gunner either, but the one who listened to the plane itself. In the mornings, the hangars smelled of oil and salt air. You practiced taking apart the right Cyclone engines with your sleeves rolled and your mind blank to the heat. You learned to feel the difference between a loose coupling and a tight one just by touch. To read the trembling of a gauge needle like another man might read a pulse. Fly the systems, they told you. Let the pilot fly the rest. You carried that phrase like a small truth. Now, months later, at 30,000 feet, it still echoes in your head. The wind outside sounds like tearing paper. Frost clings to every edge of the glass. You stand in the narrow passage between the cockpit and the bomb bay, braced against the vibration. Below your boots, the floor hums steadily with the rhythm of 4 engines. Each one has its own voice. You can tell them apart the way a musician recognizes chords. Engine 1 is slightly rough, Engine 2 hums clean, 3 has a faint whistle on throttle, and 4 has always been temperamental, though today it seems calm. You check your dials again. Oil pressure, steady. Cylinder head temperature, within limits. Turbos responding evenly. Through the narrow crawlway, you glimpse the pilot and co-pilot, hands steady on the throttles. The navigator's chart light glows red behind them. Everyone is enclosed in that dim metallic warmth, the constant trembling heartbeat of flight. You reach up toward the overhead turret handles, gloved fingers brushing cold metal. The top turret is your station too. Not just the eyes of defense, but the listening post for the ship's health. From here, you can see every shimmer of vibration in the wings, every trace of exhaust drifting past the nacelles. You rotate the turret gently to port, watching the arc of the right wingtip slice through clouds. You note the smoothness of propeller motion, 3 blades moving like clock hands. The intercom clicks softly in your headset.
Engineer, how are we running?
You press your throat mic. All systems normal. Number 3's running a bit rich, I'll adjust mixture. Roger, you turn the mixture control with a gloved hand. The needle drops a hair's breadth. The sound evens out. You listen for a moment longer, then log it in your small clipboard: date, time, minor correction noted. The act feels ritualistic now. Every small task done the same way, with the same care. The flight engineer's station is both nerve center and confessional. Behind you, the wall of gauges hums faintly. Fuel flow, boost pressure, generator load. Each flicker carries meaning. You learn to read them not as numbers, but as moods. A happy engine has a rhythm. An unhappy one sends tremors through the floorboards. You know when something is wrong before it becomes official. Outside, the air temperature has dropped to -40. The frost line on the turret dome glitters in the sun. You rub a clear patch with your sleeve and peer down. Far below, the land looks soft and distant patches of white, threads of river, darkened towns. But the beauty is abstract. You are too deep inside the machine to feel wonder. You remember something your instructor said during those early months at Gulfport. A good engineer is the quiet kind. He trusts the aircraft, but he also listens when it whispers. You didn't understand then what a whisper from a B-17 sounded like. Now you do. It's the faint cough before a misfire, the tremor before a bearing seizes. A whisper, in this world, can save lives. You run your checklist again. Fuel transfer from the outer tanks steady, oxygen pressure slightly low but stable, hydraulic pressure good, everything balanced. Below your feet, the bomb bay doors creak faintly in their locks. Beyond them lies the long grey expanse of air and expectation. The bombardier's voice comes over the intercom. ETA to target, 1 hour. You mark the note automatically. The rhythm of the mission dictates your body now. From time to time, you move between the compartments past the navigator, down toward the radio room. You check the heating ducts, tap a gauge, re-secure a loose latch.
Always moving, always listening.
The bomber feels alive under your hands, an enormous breathing animal of metal and heat. When you return to your seat, you stretch your legs and glance at the engineer's panel once more. A tremor of satisfaction runs through you at the sight of all needles aligned neatly within their arcs. The others have their own worlds. The bombardier has his sights, the gunners their windows of sky. You have your gauges. It's a quieter world, but no less vital. You think of the days before flight school, when machines were something to admire from the outside. Cars, tractors, engines in workshops. Now you inhabit one. The B-17 surrounds you like a shell, both cage and sanctuary. Every hiss, every vibration becomes part of your body's rhythm. Your gloves are stiff from cold and oil. You rub them together for warmth, though the heated suit beneath your uniform hums faintly. Even so, your fingertips are numb. You wonder briefly how the turret gunners endure it, hours of stillness, hands on triggers that are always cold. Then you return to your notes. Time stretches differently up here. The steady droning of engines makes minutes indistinguishable. You find yourself thinking back to Gulfport again, at the smell of hot asphalt, the sweat trickling into your collar, the instructor's chalkboard diagrams. You remember the moment they first let you climb into a powered engine frame and feel the vibration without fear. It had felt alive then too, though less cruel. That was the point of training, to make the extraordinary ordinary. You watch the thin vapor trails from the engines drift past your turret dome.
4 clean lines.
4 steady rhythms. At 20,000 feet, frost begins to build thicker along the turret seams. You check the heating ducts again, tapping a metal elbow with your wrench. The sound echoes faintly through the fuselage. The bomber is a symphony of small noises, and you know each one by tone. A healthy system has harmony. When something slips, the discord is instant. You lean toward the intercom. All temps within limit. Fuel balance stable. Recommend lean mix for cruise. Copy that, comes the pilot's voice, calm as ever. You watch him adjust throttles. The pitch of the engines drops slightly, smoother now, less strain. Through the side window, the sun glints off the leading edge of the wing. You can see the engine cowlings shimmer faintly. Inside them, the pistons hammer their endless rhythm, 2,000 revolutions per minute, for hours on end. You imagine the heat building, the oil thinning, the metal expanding just enough to stay true. It's a strange comfort, this dance of tolerances. When you joined, you thought flying would feel like freedom.
It doesn't, it feels like duty.
The plane flies you as much as you fly it. You maintain the balance, you hold the system steady, but the momentum belongs to something larger momentum built by 1,000 men who built this machine, and 1,000 more who maintain it on the ground. You're just one small pulse in that vast circuitry. Still, you take pride in it. There's beauty in precision, in things that work as they should. You glance at the gauges again, fuel pressure stable, manifold pressure even. You mark the numbers. The checklist feels endless, but the repetition is its own kind of prayer. A vibration passes through the deck. Not unusual, just a patch of turbulence, but you note it anyway. Habit. You tighten your safety harness and scan the wings. The clouds below shift like white sand dunes, light spilling across them in soft gradients. Somewhere beneath lies the target city, still distant, unseen, but inevitable. The intercom clicks again. Engineer, check the right inboard. I'm feeling a slight drag. You swivel your turret, glass squealing faintly. You watch the propeller blur, its edges catching sunlight. The exhaust is clean. You watch a moment longer. Nothing wrong yet, but you can't help noticing a subtle flicker of darker smoke now and then. You note it quietly in your log. Altitude 22,000. Temperature -45. Airspeed 180 knots. All within expected range. The aircraft shudders once more as it climbs higher. The frost thickens. Your breath fogs inside the mask, crystallizing at the edges. You rub your visor with a sleeve and continue watching. The gauges remain steady, obedient, loyal. You think again of Gulfport nights, when the air was heavy with mosquitoes and the classroom fans barely turned. You remember the instructor telling a joke about flying oil wells, how a B-17 could leak a gallon of oil an hour and still come home. Everyone laughed then, but now, flying above Europe, you know it wasn't really a joke. These machines survive on imperfection, held together by habit and hope. You glance again at engine 4. Still steady, though the smoke has deepened slightly. You double-check the oil pressure just under 90 psi, a shade lower than before. You lean closer, frown slightly. You make a note to watch it. The intercom crackles. The navigator's voice cuts through static. Crossing into hostile territory. The words land softly, without drama. You switch the turret to standby, rotate it aft, and resume your scan. The sky ahead is pale and wide, too bright to look at directly. In the far distance, faint puffs of cloud mark where others have already passed. The machine hums faithfully beneath you. For now, all is well. You keep your eyes on the gauges, listening for that first whisper, that small tremor that tells you the plane is beginning to tire. Another check oil temperature, slightly climbing. You log it. Cylinder head temperature rising faster on the inboard right. You tap the glass, as if persuasion could change it. The smoke thickens, barely perceptible, but real. The note in your logbook turns from observation to concern. You key the mic, pilot. Number 4's showing rough exhaust. I'll monitor. Roger that. You glance once more at the rows of trembling needles.
Everyone tells a story.
Everyone demands your attention. You breathe slow, steady, through the mask, feeling the dryness in your throat. At 25,000 feet, the pressure gauges twitch again. Then it comes a low cough, muffled but unmistakable. The vibration shifts tone, a deeper shudder rippling through the floorboards. You lean forward instinctively, eyes fixed on the right inboard engine. Black smoke unfurls against the sky like a slow sigh. You reach for the clipboard, steady your hand, and make one final note before the work begins. At 25,000 feet,
one engine begins to cough black smoke. He tightens his gloves for the long task ahead. The moment the engine coughs,
the world becomes narrower, not louder, not yet, but smaller. The steady hum of the 4 right cyclone engines loses its symmetry, and you can feel the imbalance through your boots. The vibrations that once felt like music now stutter, uneven, uncertain. It's as if the bomber itself is holding its breath. You check the gauge cluster oil pressure dropping slowly from 90 down to 75. Cylinder head temperature climbing 240, 250. The mixture lever feels stiff under your glove. You pull it back a hair, then glance toward the pilot's shoulders ahead of you. Number 4's losing oil, you say into the throat mic, voice muffled by the frozen rubber of your mask. Copy, the pilot answers, his tone calm but clipped. Feather if it gets worse. You nod instinctively even though he can't see. The headset hums with the low murmur of intercom traffic navigator confirming course, bombardier checking switches. The voices sound distant, like they're underwater. You tighten your gloves and reach for the clipboard.
Log the numbers. Always log the numbers.
25,000 feet, minus 43 degrees Celsius. Engine number 4. Oil pressure steady fall. Temperature high. The sight through the turret dome is both beautiful and cruel. The smoke trails behind the right inboard engine like ink dissolving in water. The light catches it silver at the edges. You can almost forget what it means. You unclip your harness and move toward the narrow crawlway that leads aft, past the navigator's desk. The air inside the fuselage is painfully dry.
Every breath burns your throat.
The heated suit hums faintly, but the cold finds its way in anyway through seams, through fabric, through metal. Your job now is simple in concept, impossible in comfort. Inspect the oil line.
Find the source of the leak. The pilot's voice comes again, calm, deliberate.
Engineer, confirm leak source before we feather. We'll hold formation as long as we can. Understood. You reach the small access hatch beside the bomb bay. The narrow catwalk stretches ahead, barely 12 inches wide, with open space yawning below. Through the gaps between the closed bomb bay doors, a faint strip of grey sky flickers past. You clip your safety line, lower yourself onto the catwalk, and begin to crawl. Every movement is deliberate, slow. The bomber vibrates around you, metal skin flexing, rivets humming, wind whistling just beyond. Your gloves scrape against the cold steel as you steady yourself. Frost glitters on the inner frame of the fuselage, a thin crust that fractures under your elbows. You stop halfway to steady your breathing. The oxygen line from your mask stiffens with ice. You tap it lightly with your glove to break the frost. The sound echoes faintly inside the confined tunnel. It's colder here than in any other part of the aircraft. The airflow seeps in through every seam, and the metal beneath you feels almost alive with vibration. You can feel the faint pull of gravity shift each time the aircraft banks. Pilot, this is engineer.
I'm halfway to the access panel. Roger, we're holding steady.
Oil pressure still dropping 65. The words sound distant, hollow. You focus on movement forward, one hand after the other, boots scraping against the catwalk. The metal is rough under your gloves, coated with frost crystals that crunch softly. You think about how many times you've done this in practice, back in Gulfport, crawling through mock fuselages under the humid southern heat, instructors shouting over fans. You had never been cold, then never imagined that the same procedure could make your hands ache like stone. You reach the access panel and brace yourself. The bolts are stiff from cold, but you manage to loosen them with the small wrench clipped to your belt. The first bolt clatters away, echoing down into the bomb bay's hollow space. You wince, knowing no one can hear it over the engines. When the panel comes free, a blast of air hits your face. The smell of burnt oil drifts out, faint, acrid, familiar. You angle your flashlight into the narrow cavity. The oil line runs in a curved path toward the wing root, encased in a metal sleeve. A thin film of dark residue glistens along its length. You trace it with your glove and feel where the frost meets oil. The two substances never mix evenly. The oil's heat keeps a thin channel open through the ice, and that's how you find it. The faint crack where a fitting has loosened under vibration. You lean closer, breath clouding your visor. A bead of black oil trembles at the joint, then disappears into the slipstream. You key the intercom. Confirm leak at the number 4 feed line, forward joint. Recommend reducing RPMs on 4. Copy, reducing now. The engine tone changes slower, lower, a heavy rhythmic pulse that you can feel through the catwalk. You watch the oil bead slow its formation. The leak doesn't stop, but it lessens. You record it in your notebook, your handwriting shaky from the cold.
Ink freezes at the tip of the pen, forcing you to scribble harder until it flows again.
Every motion feels exaggerated, as though the air itself resists movement. You stay there for a moment, just listening. The wind outside howls across the fuselage, a constant white noise. The vibration settles slightly. You let out a slow breath, fog spreading across your visor again. You remember a small detail from the maintenance manual: the line could be reinforced temporarily with a clamp if access permitted. But access never really permits much in flight. You glance at your toolkit strapped to your thigh. There's a spare clamp, but the space is too tight, the angle too awkward. You'd risk doing more harm than good, so you watch. You monitor. You listen. The bomber drifts slightly in turbulence, the catwalk trembling beneath you. You feel it through your knees, through your bones. You grip the edge tighter, waiting for it to pass. Engineer, status, leak stable. Temperature holding at 245, pressure 55. There's a pause, then the pilot's calm reply. Copy. We'll keep power reduced. Let me know if it worsens. You nod again, though no one sees. The act of nodding keeps you focused. Movement prevents numbness. You start crawling back toward the forward compartment. Each motion burns more than the last. Your knees ache from the metal's hardness. Your fingers are stiff enough to make gripping the handholds difficult. The air feels thinner here. Your chest rises and falls with slow, measured effort. Halfway back, you stop again to check the frost on the walls. It's growing thicker. The oxygen in your mask feels colder, each inhale like swallowing knives. The heated element in your mask flickers for a moment, then steadies. You tap it with your glove just to be sure. Your breath rasps inside the headset. The sound is comforting in a way, proof that you're still here, still breathing. By the time you reach the main compartment, your suit's heating coils are struggling to keep up. The engineer's station feels almost warm by comparison. You sink into the seat, flex your fingers, and look again at the gauges. Oil pressure 45. Temperature holding just under 250. You exhale through your nose, slow and careful. Pilot, we're steady for now, but she's bleeding fast. Recommend watching mixture number 4's losing efficiency. Understood. You can hear the faint frustration in his tone, though it's the quiet kind of recognition, not complaint. He knows as well as you do that once an engine begins to leak at altitude, time becomes measured not in hours, but in minutes. You sit back and rest your gloved hands on your knees. The bomber vibrates like a living thing. The intercom crackles occasionally short words, clipped updates. You answer when needed, otherwise silent. The world beyond the window looks frozen in time. Clouds below, sunlight above. The horizon feels unreachable. You realize, with a distant sort of awe, that you haven't moved more than a few feet in hours, yet the ground below has shifted by hundreds of miles. You glance again at the gauges. The frost on the glass has started to spread, tiny crystalline webs creeping from the edges inward. You wipe at them with your sleeve, but they reform instantly. The cold has found its way even here, even inside the machine's heart. The bombardier's voice comes through faintly. 10 minutes to initial point. You feel the subtle shift in pitch as the bomber adjusts course. The pressure in your ears changes slightly. You steady yourself, eyes fixed on the engine readings, 40 psi, then 35. You key the mic again. Oil pressure dropping below safe limits. Recommend feathering 4. There's a pause. You can almost hear the pilot thinking through the implications: reduced power, increased drag, the danger of falling behind formation. Then his voice returns, calm as ever. Negative for now. Hold it until we release. We'll need the thrust on the return leg. You acknowledge, though uneasily. You can feel the subtle tremor of protest through the fuselage. The engine still runs, but unevenly now, with small, irregular pulses. You pull your mask aside just long enough to sip from your water flask. The liquid is half frozen. It tastes metallic. You take one swallow and put it away again. The smell of oil and cold aluminum fills the air. Your gloves are slick now, the fingertips shiny with residue from the leak inspection. You rub them together, trying to generate friction, but the motion barely helps. Another check of the gauges. Pressure 30. Temperature climbing 260, then 265. You frown, note it again. The frost on the glass thickens, as if the air itself is tightening around you. Pilot. We're nearing critical on 4, you report. Copy. Hold formation. The words repeat in your headset, muffled by static. You can hear other crews reporting over the shared frequency fragments of sentences, code names, coordinates. The world narrows again to sound and vibration. You glance up through the turret dome. The sun glints off the smoke drifting behind the engine. It's darker now, no longer grey, but black and heavy. You reach instinctively for the mixture lever again, easing it forward, trying to balance airflow and fuel. The response is sluggish. The needle on the manifold pressure gauge trembles. You tap the glass once. The frost creeps higher. You can barely see the numbers now. The condensation from your breath gathers inside your mask, freezing in small ridges that make speaking difficult. Pilot, you say quietly. We're losing it. No answer yet. Just the low hum of 3 engines doing the work of 4. Then slowly, the needle stops moving altogether. You watch helpless as the frost line overtakes the face of the gauge. The engine's rhythm falters, catches, and dies. He sees frost crawling over the gauge glass. Then the right engine cuts out entirely. When the engine died, the world did not end. It only grew quieter. The bomber shuddered once, a long, weary tremor that passed through every rivet and bolt and then settled into a new rhythm. 3 engines now carried the weight of 10 men, 6 tons of bombs already gone, and 1,000 miles of cold sky still ahead. You log the failure on your clipboard with a hand that barely obeys you. The pencil trembles against the page, graphite dull against the paper. Number 4, oil pressure 0.
Engine feathered. Feathering takes the edge off the drag.
You can feel it almost immediately, a change in the tone of the vibration. Smoother now, though slower. The propeller blades lock into their thin, knife-like alignment with the wind, and the dead engine begins to spin in silence. Engineer, how's she feel? The pilot asks through the intercom. His voice sounds steady, but you can hear the fatigue under it, the tightness of someone managing more than he can see. Stable, you answer.
Temperature's falling. No sign of fire. Copy that.
Let's get her home. It's a simple statement, but one that fills the entire cabin with purpose. The flight home is long. Not dramatic, not frantic, just a slow unraveling of tension. The aircrew speaks less now. The navigator murmurs headings. The pilot trims the controls, checks the horizon, breathes through his mask. The turret gunners scan the empty sky, more out of habit than fear. You keep your eyes on the gauges, even the dead ones.
Habit does that.
You've been trained to never stop watching. Each small tremor of the needles feels personal, a quiet conversation between you and the machine. Frost creeps over the instrument glass again. You wipe it with your sleeve and leave a faint smudge of warmth behind. For a few seconds you can see your reflection helmet, mask, goggles, breath clouding the inside, and the frost returns, erasing you. Below, Germany slides away under a blanket of clouds. The world looks peaceful from here, detached. Fields, rivers, forests, all soft shapes, distant, mute. You think about how strange it is to fight a war without ever really touching it. Hours pass. The gauges move slower now, the daylight thinning around the edges. When the radio operator reports landfall over the channel, a wave of quiet relief rolls through the intercom. No cheering, no words, just silence and the sound of oxygen hissing softly through lines. By the time you see England again, the clouds have thickened into a low grey sea. The pilot requests landing clearance. The answer crackles through the headset, a calm voice, clipped with static. Roger. Fortress 247 cleared to land on runway 3. Wind from the west, 10 knots. The pilot exhales, long and slow. Copy 3 engines. You unstrap yourself from the turret and check the system one last time. You run your gloved fingers along the checklist bolted to the panel.
Oil system log. Engine feathered, confirmed. Oxygen line frost severe.
Heater output minimal. You almost laugh at that last one. Minimal feels like an understatement for what you've just endured. The bomber descends through fog, and the world outside turns white. You can't see the ground until the last second, the runway lights flickering through the mist like a row of candles. Then comes the faintest jolt as the wheels kiss earth. A small bounce, a roll, and finally stillness. The engines wind down one by one. The sound that replaces them, the absence of vibration, is almost louder. You sit for a moment, helmet still on, listening to the creak of cooling metal. Someone in the back says softly, "We made it," the pilot's voice replies. Quiet and even, "Yeah, we did. You unbuckle. Stretch your legs and feel every joint protest." The air on the ground feels thick, heavy, alive. Even through your mask, it smells of grass and fuel instead of frost and oil. Outside, the maintenance trucks are already moving toward you. Men in thick coats hurry across the tarmac, waving flashlights, their breath rising in pale clouds. The bomber looks enormous in the floodlights, patched, pitted, streaked with oil along her starboard wing. You climb down the ladder slowly, boots touching the ground, with a kind of disbelief. The cold still clings to your skin, deep and persistent, as if it followed you down from the sky. One of the ground crew meets you at the wing. "Heard you lost a jug up there," he says, wiping his hands on a rag. "Number 4, you reply. "Oil line failure?"
Probably at the forward joint, he nods once.
"We'll see soon enough." The two of you walk beneath the wing together. The light catches the metal's rough surface. Scorched streaks of oil turn solid in the cold, frozen mid-run along the nacelle. The propeller blades are locked still, rimed with frost. The crew begins their shutdown ritual. The pilot signs the mission log at the tailgate table, his handwriting precise despite the shaking in his hands. The navigator folds maps into neat squares. The radio operator removes his headset and rubs the marks it left on his ears. You take your notebook and follow the maintenance chief around the engine. He leans in with a flashlight, tracing the dark stains with his gloved finger. "Yeah," he murmurs, "she burst clean. Line cracked at the flare fitting.
Vibration did it. You kneel beside him, shining your light into the joint.
The metal glints where it failed, a sharp, narrow split no longer than a fingernail. Oil still clings to the edges, glimmering faintly in the cold air. You log it automatically, cause vibration fatigue.
Action replace line.
Inspect fittings on 3 and 4 for symmetry stress. The chief whistles softly. You caught it early. Another 10 minutes and we'd be scraping number 4 off the wing. You nod, but say nothing. There's no pride in it, just the dull satisfaction of procedure followed, notes kept, survival earned by routine. Someone from the operations office brings over thermoses of coffee.
It's lukewarm and bitter, but it feels miraculous.
You cup it in both hands, letting the steam thaw your fingers. Around you, the others drink in silence, each in their own thoughts. No one talks about fear.
No one needs to.
The silence itself is full of meaning. When the paperwork is done, the crew disperses slowly toward the debriefing hut. Inside, it's dimly lit, walls lined with maps and chalkboards. The smell of cigarette smoke and wet wool fills the air. The intelligence officer asks the usual questions: altitude, formation, enemy, contact. The pilot answers, the navigator adds a few coordinates. You give your report: last oil system failure, probable cause, corrective notes. They nod, write it down, move on. When it's over, you find a seat by the heater, a small electric coil glowing orange. You don't take off your gloves. The warmth feels almost intrusive after so much cold. The doctor passes through, checking oxygen levels, asking about frostbite. You flex your fingers, show him your cheeks red and raw. He nods approvingly. No damage, he says. You were lucky. You smile faintly behind the fatigue. Luck had nothing to do with it, you say, though maybe it did. Later, when the others have gone, you return to the hangar. The maintenance crew is still at work, the sound of wrenches echoing through the metal shell. The bomber sits half-lit under a single lamp, wings streaked with frost, panels open like ribs. You climb the ladder again, back into the engineer's station. It feels smaller now, familiar in a way that's hard to explain. You run your gloved hand across the instrument panel, tracing the cold glass of the oil gauges. There's still frost along the edges. Still the faint smell of oil, still the hum of memory. You take out your notebook and flip to the last page. The pencil leaves a faint grey mark as you write, mission complete. Engine 4 failed due to oil line rupture at altitude. Aircraft returned safely. Crew status all present. You close the book, rest it on the panel for a moment, and look out through the turret dome. The night beyond is soft and silent, the airfield lights glowing faintly in mist. You think about how, for all the noise and motion of flight, the moments that stay with you are the quiet one, the sound of frost forming, the vibration fading, the hum of metal at rest. You remove one glove and place your bare hand against the engine cowling beside you. It's still faintly warm, just enough to sting your fingertips. And as the last of the heat fades into the cold air of the hangar, you realize that the only warmth you felt that day was from the engine you nearly froze to save. The cold came first as a whisper, then it stayed. By midnight, frost had crept in through every seam of the Neeson hut, the curved steel ribs, the gaps around the window frames, even the floorboards that never quite fit right. The air inside was still, heavy, and so cold it made your breath hang in the dark like a soft, private fog. Someone had said the forecast promised snow, but in East Anglia, the sky never really changed. It just sat there, low and grey, pressing down on the flat fields and airstrips that stretched for miles in every direction. You lie awake, listening to the corrugated roof crack as it contracts in the freeze. The coal stove in the center glows faintly red, like the heart of something half alive. Every few minutes, it lets out a pop, and a handful of sparks leap up the flue. 6 bunks share the hut. Each man has layered his blankets, greatcoat and flying jacket over himself in a kind of patchwork armor against the cold. The ground crews call it sleeping in sections, half sleep, half shiver, all endurance. The walls are bare except for a few pinned-up photos, wives, sweethearts, football teams, and a curling calendar from 1942 that no one ever replaced. A mug sits by the stove with yesterday's tea frozen solid inside it. Outside, the wind drags across the fields, carrying the smell of oil and exhaust from the hangars. Somewhere in the distance, a generator hums a constant, tired rhythm that blends into the silence. You turn on your side, the thin mattress crunching under you where the condensation froze during the night. The cold doesn't just settle, it climbs through the floorboards, into your boots, up your legs. You tuck your hands deeper under the blanket, fingers stiff and numb. Across the room, Corporal Wicks mutters in his sleep. He's been on the same crew for a year now, tending to the same Halifax bomber. His overalls hang by the stove, steaming faintly where he left them to dry after the last shift. By 3 a.m., the stove has burned itself down to embers. The warmth fades like breath on glass. One of the men gets up, pulls on his coat, and fumbles for the coal bucket. The noise wakes half the hut boots scuffing, coal clattering, a small curse whispered into the dark. No one complains. Everyone knows the ritual. The sound of coal hitting metal is as familiar as reveille. He crouches, feeds a few lumps into the stove, then waits until the dull glow flares back into orange. The light flickers across faces half buried in blankets, young men, most of them barely 20, hair flattened from caps, skin raw from wind and oil. Their eyes remain closed, but you can tell they're awake, counting the hours until morning. Life in the huts has a rhythm of its own, shaped less by clocks than by engines. The day never really ends, it only changes temperature. At first light, the condensation on the roof will melt and drip onto everything: blankets, boots, letters, sometimes straight into your tea. By evening, it will freeze again. There's no insulation, just layers of tar paper and steel.
Men stuff socks into the door gaps, nail bits of cardboard to the walls, even hang parachute silk to trap some of the heat.
It helps a little. Mostly, it just looks like they're trying to live inside a machine. On the small wooden table by the door, there's a kettle, a dented tin of condensed milk, and a loaf of bread hard enough to use as a tool. Breakfast usually means tea so strong it could strip paint, and toast if the stove is hot enough. No one talks much before dawn. The silence feels sacred, the only peace before the day starts moving again. You can hear the bass coming alive outside before you ever see it. Trucks backfiring, a door slamming in the motor pool, the faint metallic clang of tools dropped on frozen concrete at 5 a.m. The first engines begin to idle on the tarmac low. Steady thunder that rolls across the field and seeps through the hut walls. The sound vibrates in your ribs. It's both comfort and reminder. Today will be like yesterday, and yesterday was like every day since the winter began. You pull on your uniform, stiff with cold. The buttons fight you. Your breath fogs the air in front of your face. The floor feels like ice. Someone cracks a joke about the luxury of the British tropics, and there's a ripple of laughter, thin but genuine. You stamp your boots, rub your hands, and join the queue for the wash basin outside. The water in the tin bowl has frozen solid overnight. You break the surface with your knuckles and splash what you can on your face. The shock wakes you up better than any coffee. Across the field, the hangars loom like dark shells against the pale sky. Inside them, the bombers wait. Halifaxes, Wellingtons, Lancasters, each covered in a thin crust of frost that glitters in the floodlights. Someone inside the hut says quietly, "They'll be flying early today." Schweinfurt again, maybe. No one answers. The ground crews know better than to speculate. They service the planes, not the strategy. Their war is measured in bolts, hoses, and gallons of fuel. You pour the last of the hot water from the kettle into a chipped mug and cradle it between your palms. The warmth seeps in slowly, almost painfully. There's a comfort in the monotony. Each day repeats with such precision that even misery becomes predictable, manageable. You find yourself grateful for small things: a dry pair of socks, a working stove, the smell of toast. By the time the clock above the door ticks past 5:30, the hut is awake. Men buttoning tunics, wrapping scarves, lacing boots. The stove glows brighter now, fed and alive. A few voices hum tunelessly a habit to fill the silence between tasks. Outside, the first flight crews are walking toward the briefing huts, shoulders hunched, faces half hidden in scarves. The ground crew will follow soon, tools in hand, ready to coax cold engines to life. You stand by the door, pulling on your gloves. The air that hits you when you open it is sharp enough to sting. Frost coats the path like crushed glass, crunching under every step. In the distance, a spotlight flickers on, illuminating the outlines of the parked bombers, silver, white,
And still, the sound of engines idling grows louder, steadier.
the rhythm of another day beginning. The Nissen hut behind you hums with its own quiet energy, boots scraping, laughter, the clang of a kettle being set down too hard. Life continues, mechanical but meaningful, and as you step out into the freezing air, you can already smell the exhaust, the faint tang of aviation fuel, and something else too, the unspoken knowledge that these same men will be back here tonight, if luck allows, chasing warmth in a hut that never really gets warm. The sound of engines idling outside grows into a steady vibration. The men glance at one another, wordless, awake now. The day has begun, and the crews were already up before dawn. By first light, the field has turned to mud again. It always does. The grass airstrips of East Anglia were never meant for this kind of weight, not for 4-engine bombers, not for fuel bowsers, not for the endless movement of boots and trucks that chew the ground into something between soil and soup. The men call it the eternal pudding, thick, brown, and bottomless. You step out from the Nissen hut, and the first thing you notice is the smell oil, damp earth and coal smoke, a scent that seeps into everything, your gloves, your scarf, your very skin. The frost from the night is already melting, and water trickles through the ruts where tractors have passed. Engines are warming up across the dispersal area. The sound is constant, deep, rhythmic, like the beating of slow, heavy drums. The ground crews begin their morning ritual. It's not glamorous, and it never changes. Each aircraft waits at its own circular stand, spread out across the field to minimize damage if one explodes during fueling or loading. Between them, narrow tracks of gravel win through the mud, half submerged under puddles. Men move along these tracks in 2s and 3s, carrying tools wrapped in rags, buckets of warm water, or long hoses coiled like snakes. The cold bites hard, but they work slowly, methodically.
No one hurries, there's no point. They start with the frost. The wings are coated in a thin layer of ice, invisible until the light catches it.
Left unchecked, it changes everything: lift, drag, the balance of the plane itself. There's no fancy de-icing equipment here, not in 1943. Instead, they carry kettles of boiling water from the huts, poured carefully along the wing roots, letting steam rise in soft curls. Sometimes they use brushes, sometimes just rags. The water freezes again almost as soon as it hits the surface. It's a race against the cold. One of the men mutters, "You could pour the whole mess hall kettle and it still wouldn't thaw a wingtip." The others just smile, breath clouding in the air. Complaining wastes warmth. They move on to the engine's next Rolls-Royce Merlins, each one needing inspection, oil checks, magneto tests. The metal is bitterly cold to the touch. You learn to work by feel because gloves are too clumsy, but bare fingers stick to frozen bolts if you're not careful. Oil thickens like treacle in the cold. So they use preheaters, small fires, or electrical blowers placed beneath the nacelles to warm the crankcases before startup. The smell of hot oil mixes with exhaust, sharp and metallic. Nearby, a Bedford fuel truck hums quietly. The hose snakes out toward the wing, dripping fuel into open tanks. Each Lancaster takes over 2,000 gallons for a long mission, a process that can take an hour or more. Every drop is measured, logged, recorded by hand in notebooks that smudge easily in the damp air. It's meticulous work, but no one calls it exciting. At the far end of the dispersal, a small tractor tows a line of bomb carts. The steel wheels sink deep into the mud, leaving grooves that fill immediately with brown water. The bombs themselves are covered with tarpaulins, frost forming on the edges. Armourers walk alongside, cigarettes clamped in lips, their breath and smoke mingling. They check the fuses, remove safety caps, mark each weapon with chalk numbers. The markings aren't poetic, just target codes and serials. The poetry, if any, is in the routine. They talk little. The rumble of engines drowns conversation. One man, Sergeant Ellis, steps aside to let a truck pass. His boots make a sound like suction as he lifts them free from the mud. He's been working on the same aircraft for 7 months, Lancaster J. Johnny, 460 Squadron, and he knows every rivet by touch. Every morning, he checks her over as if she's alive. Oil pressure lines, tire inflation, coolant levels, hydraulic pumps. He knows the hum she makes when the engines run clean, the smell when she doesn't. Sometimes he talks to her under his breath, not out of superstition, but out of habit. As the sun climbs weakly through the cloud, the field turns slick with reflected light. The men squint through it, wiping grime from their eyes. A lorry drives by, splattering mud across a dozen uniforms. No one bothers to shout. You can't stay clean here. By mid-morning, the first of the bombers begins to taxi for run-up tests. The sound is immense, 4 engines vibrating the air itself. The crews in the huts come to their doors to watch, steaming mugs in hand.
Maintenance men stand by with fire extinguishers and wrenches, ready to run if something goes wrong.
The ground trembles beneath them as the throttles open briefly, then close. Satisfied, they signal with gloved hands and retreat back to their work. The rhythm of the day continues. Fill, check, clean, repeat. Lunch is taken standing up, usually tea and a sandwich from a tin. Some heat theirs on the warm metal of the exhausts, balancing mugs on nacelles.
Others just eat cold, one hand holding bread, the other tightening a bolt. The rain comes and goes, sometimes sleet.
Sometimes both at once. There's nowhere to shelter you, just pull your collar higher and keep going. In the ordnance shed, bombs are stacked in neat rows. The air smells of chemicals and earth. Each one is checked 3 times before being loaded. The armourers work in near silence, respectful, deliberate. Outside, the mud has deepened into pools. You can see reflections of the aircraft in them, silver ghosts distorted by ripples. A pair of ground crewmen push a trolley through the sludge, boots sinking ankle deep. Every few feet they stop to rest, leaning on the handles, breath steaming like small chimneys. They laugh quietly about how the mud is the one thing that always wins. It clings to everything, boots, cuffs, tools, and by nightfall, it'll be tracked back into every hut on base. A corporal walks by, clipboard under his arm, shouting above the engines.
Check those undercarriages again before takeoff.
The others nod without looking up.
They've already done it twice.
They'll do it again. It's just how things are. Afternoons blur into one long stretch of movement, towing, lifting, refueling, checking hydraulics, adjusting flaps. The men move with the slow precision of people who know mistakes can't be afforded. The only breaks come when the weather pauses them, fog too thick, ice too heavy, rain that turns the field into a mirror. Then they stand together under the wings, smoking, waiting, talking about nothing at all. In those moments, time feels suspended. The engines tick quietly as they cool, and the sky feels endless. By late afternoon, the loading is done. The aircraft sit heavy with bombs and fuel, dark shapes against the pale sky. The air smells of petrol, mud, and frost. The crews arrive from briefing, faces pale under helmets, moving with quiet purpose. Ground crew step back as pilots climb aboard, each offering a nod or a brief wave. It's a silent exchange trust, given, trust, accepted. Engines roar to life one by one, each coughing plume of smoke mixing into a grey fog that rolls across the dispersal. The ground shakes again. You can feel it through your boots. The men cover their ears, watching as the first bomber turns toward the runway. The wheels cut deep grooves through the mud, splattering anyone too close. One after another, the bombers line up, waiting their turn. Props blur into circles of light. The noise builds, but no one speaks, they just watch. When the first takes off, it seems almost reluctant, heavy with load. The others follow, lifting slowly into the mist. Within minutes, the field empties. Just exhaust haze, tire ruts and puddles remain. The ground crews stand quietly, eyes following the dark shapes as they vanish into cloud. Then they turn back to their work tidying, logging fuel figures, coiling hoses, scraping mud from boots. Someone starts the kettle again. Someone else lights a cigarette. The silence after takeoff always feels strange, like the world has stopped humming. A mechanic leans against a wheel chock, watching the steam rise from his mug. Frost gathers on the rim, delicate and white. He wipes it away absently with a thumb. The mud still clings to everything, but for the first time all day, no one minds. As the last bomber lifts off into the grey sky, a ground crewman sets his tea down on a toolbox, only to find frost already forming on the mug. He smiles faintly, scrapes it away with his glove, and watches the vapour fade into the cold air. By nightfall, the field is quiet again.
Engines gone.
Bombers somewhere over Germany.
Only the wind remains. It moves through the rows of Nissen huts, rattling the curved tin walls, whispering through cracks stuffed with newspaper.
Inside, the air smells faintly of damp wool and burnt coal. A few stoves glow orange in the half-dark, fed with the last lumps from the day's ration. You sit near one, boots steaming, gloves hanging to dry. Around you, the men write letters home. Some sit on upturned crates, some on toolboxes. One uses the wing of a broken model airplane as a writing board. The paper is thin and curls in the heat.
Ink freezes if left too long uncapped. No one talks much at first, just the scratch of pens, the occasional cough, the pop of a coal spark.
Outside, sleet patters softly on the roof, a sound like sand poured through fingers. A corporal reads over his own words, then laughs quietly.
Can't tell her about the mud, he mutters. She'd think I was living in a swamp. Someone else answers from the shadows.
You are living in a swamp. They both laugh, low and tired. That's how most nights go. Humour measured in teaspoons, shared quietly so as not to waste the energy. The letters themselves are small acts of warmth. They mention nothing about targets or missions. Instead, the taste of tea after work, the frost that looks like sugar on the grass. The time someone put salt in the mess coffee just to see who'd notice. In one corner, a sergeant folds his letter carefully and slides it into an envelope. Writing the address in neat block letters, Mrs. E. Price, 42 Poplar Avenue, Derby. He stares at it a while before tucking it into his jacket. Beside him, a younger mechanic sketches instead outlines of the airfield, the curve of a hangar roof, a hand resting on a spanner. His pencil smudges the paper grey. When asked why, he shrugs and says, "Easier than words." A kettle whistles on the stove, slightly bent from too much use. Someone pours tea into enamel mugs, dark and sweet. Sugar when there's any, clumps at the bottom. They pass the mugs around without asking. For a while, everyone drinks and listens. The base generator hums somewhere in the distance. A light bulb flickers, then steadies. Rain shifts to snow, you can tell by the way the sound softens on the roof. Outside, the dispersal area glows faintly in the moonlight. Empty stands, puddles frozen into thin glass. A few airmen walk between huts, their boots crunching softly. Back inside, a corporal pulls out a small notebook marked Form 700, the aircraft maintenance log. He begins filling in lines by hand, each one careful. Oil replenished, 3 gallons. Starboard inner magneto replaced. Flap linkage inspected, satisfactory. There's comfort in the precision.
Numbers that make sense.
Each page smells faintly of oil and pencil graphite. Another logbook lies open nearby, a record of man-hours spent. Yesterday, 14 today, 16 no one complains. That's just how it is. On a shelf above the stove sits a photograph, 5 men standing in front of a Lancaster, all grinning, sleeves rolled up despite the cold. The photograph is already fading at the edges, heat curling it slightly. Someone says quietly, 2 of them posted to new stations.
One's in hospital with frostbite. One's still here. No one asks which. It's the kind of conversation that drifts and disappears like smoke. The heater begins to sputter, drawing attention.
A pair of hands adjust the vent, coaxing the coal to catch again. Warmth spreads unevenly. The side closest to the stove feels almost pleasant. The far end of the hut stays freezing. You can see your breath even indoors. A diary lies open on the table, the private kind, not for official entries. The handwriting is small, neat, and slightly slanted. January 12th, the ground froze solid today.
Couldn't drive the tractor until we thawed the fuel line with a match.
The tea froze too.
Still, we got the kite up by noon.
She flew clean. Best sound in the world, that Merlin hum. Another page, later that week. Rained for 3 days. Straight.
Mud everywhere.
Couldn't feel my toes after shift. Ellis says this is character building. Told him I have enough character to last me years. The tone is wry, never bitter. These men find balance in understatement. At one end of the hut, 2 mechanics play cards with engine parts as chips washers, bolts, bits of safety wire. The loser has to clean the oil filter bench in the morning.
Laughter flickers between them like sparks from the stove. Someone starts humming an RAF tune that everyone knows, but no one remembers the name of.
The kind of song that needs no melody to be recognized. Soon, a few voices join in softly, not singing so much as breathing the words. Outside, the wind picks up again. The snow drifts sideways, tapping faintly against the tin walls. Inside, pens keep moving. Logs fill, letters finish. Tea cools. It's late, but no one sleeps yet. Not until they hear the sound of returning engines, the low rumble that means the bombers are coming home. It begins faint, almost imagined. Then it grows, pulsing through the night air. The men stop writing and listen. One by one, the aircraft pass overhead, descending toward the runway. Some sound even steady. Others cough and rattle, wounded but alive. No one cheers. They just nod quietly to one another. Relief is its own language. Outside, the field lights blink faintly through the fog.
Tires splash down. Engines throttle back.
The night swallows the noise. Inside the hut, someone exhales. Someone else folds his unfinished letter and says, "I'll finish it tomorrow." The kettle whistles again. The same one. The same chipped handle. It's passed around once more. They know the crews will need them in the morning to refuel, to patch holes, to make the machines whole again. The night stretches long, but the work never stops. Before bed, the corporal closes the maintenance log, presses his hand flat against the cover, and says quietly,
"Another one done. No ceremony."
Just fact. He blows out the lamp. The glow fades, leaving only the sound of wind and the slow ticking of the stove. The men settle under their blankets, boots lined up by the wall.
One mumbles something about home, about hot baths and dry socks.
Another chuckles softly in the dark. The hut creaks, the roof shifts with the wind. A faint warmth lingers. In the morning, the logs will be checked, the frost scraped, the engines coaxed to life again.
None of them ever flew, but their fingerprints were on every mission.
You're still at your table, tracing lines that no longer match the sky above you. The bomber trembles slightly, buffeted by crosswinds you can't measure anymore. Outside, it's all grey, a rolling wall of cloud that swallows everything. The altimeter reads 25,000 feet. Temperature minus 38 degrees Celsius. Course estimated, not confirmed. In this kind of weather, the entire job becomes guesswork disguised as precision. You draw another pencil mark, tap your watch, and note the time.
Every 3 minutes you should have a fix.
You're on your fifth without one. The stars are gone, the coast is gone, even the horizon has disappeared. You can feel the vibration of the aircraft through your elbows resting on the table, a constant.
Numbing hum that never changes, even when the world outside does, navigator.
Confirm position. The voice is the pilot's, steady but faint over the intercom. You hesitate, eyes on the map. Position uncertain, you reply. Still estimating drift based on wind direction. It's not the answer anyone wants, but it's the truth. The wind at this altitude could be 70 knots from any direction, and without a visual fix, there's no way to know. You reach for the radio compass, an old friend with unreliable moods. It's designed to lock onto ground stations, beacons scattered across Britain and occupied Europe, but the signal fades easily. Tonight, it's mostly static. The radio operator turns in his seat, adjusts a dial. I'm getting weak tone from Nickerbeam, he says. That's one of the German radio beams. You make a note. It gives you a bearing, but not a distance. Like hearing an echo in a fog. You try another, a British beacon codenamed G. It's part of a new system, a network of radar pulses that measures distance by timing radio signals. When it works, it can pinpoint your location within a mile. But range fades with altitude, and at 25,000 feet over hostile territory, signals bend, distort, and vanish. You switch the receiver to the GE channel. Watch the faint green trace crawl across the cathode screen. 2 pulses, then 3, then nothing. The system can't see you anymore. You're flying blind. For a moment you just listen to the engines, to the faint crackle of static, to your own breath fogging inside the oxygen mask. You record a rough position anyway, based on fuel used and speed maintained. By your math, you should be somewhere over northern Germany. By instinct, you're not so sure. The plane rocks slightly as it hits another pocket of turbulence. Loose pencils roll toward the edge of the table. You catch them, line them back up neatly, a small act of control in a world of uncertainty. There's a rhythm to navigation, even when it fails. Plot, estimate, correct, repeat. It's a process designed to comfort as much as to guide. You think of the training rooms back at Selman Field, neat chalk diagrams, clean blackboards, predictable skies. Those classrooms never mentioned what to do when everything disappeared. The bombardier leans back through the narrow crawlway.
How's our position looking?
You glance up at him, somewhere between confident and hopeful. He nods, half smiling, and crawls back toward the nose. It's the kind of humor that keeps people sane up here. You make another mark. By your latest reckoning, you've drifted 15 miles north of course. You call it out over the intercom. Adjust heading to 068. Correcting for wind drift. The pilot repeats the heading. The plane turns gently. Outside, the world remains invisible. You lean toward the drift meter again, peering through its small lens. The ground is hidden, but you can sometimes detect faint movement, the shadow of clouds, the shimmer of flak bursts far below. You can't use that for a fix, but it reminds you that the Earth is still down there. Minutes pass, then hours, though it's impossible to tell which. The cold creeps through your gloves, through your boots, through every layer of uniform. You flex your fingers to keep the blood moving. The pencil feels stiff in your hand. You check your calculations again. True airspeed, 180 knots. Wind correction angle, unknown. Fuel remaining, sufficient, but not generous. You adjust the chronometer and write another note in the logbook. The handwriting is shaky now, not from nerves, but from cold and vibration. The pilot's voice breaks in again. "We're supposed to be over Bremen by now." "I know," you answer quietly. "What do you see?"
Nothing. Can you raise the GEE again?
Trying. You turn the dials once more, listening to the faint pulse of the system. Rhythmic clicks like a heartbeat through the static. For a few seconds, it looks promising. Then it fades again. You sigh, make another estimate. At times like this, navigation becomes less about mathematics and more about belief. You believe the instruments. You believe the training. You believe that each small correction will bring you closer to where you're meant to be. The clouds begin to thin, barely. You catch glimpses of white below maybe snow-covered fields, maybe clouds layered beneath clouds. It's impossible to say. If you could see just one landmark, a river, a city, a coastline, you could fix everything again. You look through the astrodome, hoping the stars have returned. They haven't. The sky is a dull grey dome, lit faintly from somewhere far above. The bomber holds steady. The engines drone on, 4 steady tones that vibrate through the fuselage. You flip to another chart, one for Northern Europe. The folds are soft from use, the edges stained with fingerprints and graphite dust. A line you drew an hour ago curves eastward. Now you start another one. If your previous fix was wrong even slightly, this new line will be wrong too. Errors multiply in the air. You erase, redraw, remeasure. Each action calm, deliberate, almost meditative. Somewhere behind you, one of the waist gunners hums through his intercom a low tune, barely audible. It fills the silence. You return to your instruments, checking every gauge again, even though you know they haven't changed. It's a ritual. Reassurance through repetition. The cold air makes the map paper brittle. Each time you move it, it crackles softly. You wonder briefly, how many other navigators are doing the same thing right now, guessing, correcting, pretending they know where they are while the clouds erase the earth below. Thousands maybe. All drawing lines no one will ever see. You pull your gloves tighter, adjust your mask. The oxygen hose hums faintly with each breath. At last, through a thin break in the clouds, you glimpse something, a jagged line, dark against white. A river maybe. You trace your finger on the map, trying to match it to something real. The Weser? The Rhine? It's too brief to tell. The clouds close again. You sigh softly. Visual contact lost. The intercom crackles. "Copy that," the pilot says. "Keep us on the best guess, best guess." It's an honest phrase. It's what keeps planes alive. You work another series of calculations. Speed times time equals distance. At this altitude, even a 5-minute error means a difference of 15 miles. You sketch another mark anyway. Your pencil scratches across the map in slow, deliberate arcs. And then a flicker. A light on the radio compass. Weak but steady. The operator leans in. Getting a British signal could be G chain A, must be close to the North Sea. You glance at your chart. That shouldn't be possible yet, not for another hour. You check again. The frequency matches, but the timing doesn't. The beam must be refracting, bending across the ionosphere.
False signal, you write it down anyway.
Everything gets recorded, even the useless data. The longer you work, the more detached you feel from the rest of the crew. They're living the flight, seeing, hearing, reacting. You're living inside a map. Outside, the first faint bursts of flak bloom in the distance, small black puffs against the grey. The formation must be near the target zone, which means you were right, or close enough. You don't look down at the explosions, you never do. Instead, you check your stopwatch again, adjust your next estimate,
and move your pencil forward another inch.
The noise from the flak fades behind the engine hum, and you keep working. An hour later, the clouds open again, just enough to reveal scattered patches of land. Rectangles, roads, clusters of roofs, but no names. You trace them on the map, matching shapes to memory. It could be Hanover. It could be Osnabrück. It could be anything. You draw a new line across the chart, slower this time, the pencil pressing deep into the paper. You lean back, exhale through the mask, and whisper to yourself, "We could be over Germany, or Belgium, or nowhere at all." He draws a new line across the chart, unsure if they're even over Germany or Belgium. The clouds thinned somewhere over the North Sea. The hum of the engines softened, the worst of the flak far behind. You could tell by the way the aircrew stopped speaking over the intercom, not from fear now, but fatigue. That peculiar, floating quiet that comes only after the danger has already passed. You glance at your watch. 4 hours since takeoff, 2 since the drop. It feels longer. The map in front of you is crowded with pencil marks, lines drawn, erased, redrawn. A record of doubt disguised as certainty. Now comes the part no one trains you for, the return. Not dramatic, not glorious, just hours of recalculation and waiting. You check the drift meter again, adjusting for wind. The numbers blur slightly. You rub your eyes, make another note. Heading 272 degrees. Airspeed 185 knots. Ground speed estimated at 160. That's what will carry you home, a few numbers and a few lines that you hope mean what you think they do. The pilot's voice breaks through the quiet.
"Navigator, how are we looking?"
You answer automatically. "Crossing the coast in 20 minutes. Bearing steady." It's the right thing to say. It might even be true. Below there's only ocean grey water blending into grey air. The kind of horizon that hides itself. You mark the time again, small, precise gestures that keep you tethered to the routine. That's the trick of it. Routine replaces fear. Charts, compasses, corrections. Each one a small act of faith that the math will hold. You glance at the GE receiver one last time. Now, near friendly airspace, the signals grow stronger. Pulses blink on the green screen in steady rhythm, clean, readable, obedient. For the first time all night, you know exactly where you are. "Confirm position," you say into the mic, voice steady. "Copy," comes the reply. The others will rest easier, knowing the map is back in agreement with the world. You start the descent log. Altitude, direction, fuel remaining, time to base. Your handwriting steadies again. Outside, a thin dawn begins to show, not sunrise exactly, but a lighter shade of grey at the edge of the clouds. The bomber's shadow, faint and distorted, moves somewhere beneath you. You think of the classroom diagrams again, the perfect triangles of wind correction, the neat examples of course deviation. In training, every problem had a clean solution. Out here, even being right feels like luck, pretending to be logic. The crew begins their checklist. Mixture rich, flaps to 20, landing lights armed. Each sound of switches clicking has a rhythm to it, the mechanical lullaby of returning alive. As the airfield appears below, small and shining through mist, you make the final entry in your log. ETA confirmed. Course completed. You close the notebook, set your pencil down. It rolls slightly with the vibration, then settles against the map's edge. Touchdown is soft. The tires whisper against the wet runway. A pause, then the reverse thrust hums gently, slowing the great machine. Engines wind down one by one until there's nothing left but silence, the kind that seems to echo even when it shouldn't. The pilot shuts the switches. The navigator, you finally unclips the oxygen hose. The air smells of oil and cold aluminum. Climbing down from the fuselage ladder, you feel lighter but not quite safe. The ground feels wrong after so many hours of vibration. You carry your map case back toward the debriefing hut. The wooden floor creaks, coffee steams in tin mugs. Everyone speaks quietly, as though afraid the noise might wake something. The intelligence officer waits at the table. He asks for your flight path, the exact route, the times, the wind estimates. You spread out the chart, smoothing the creases with cold fingers. There it is, the night's entire journey in graphite and ink, a web of lines that only you can read. He leans in, nodding, tracing the marks with a gloved finger. Bit north of the planned track, he murmurs. But solid work, you nod, though the compliment feels hollow, because you know how much of it was guesswork. How many of those lines were more prayer than geometry? Later, when the debrief is over, you linger by the table. Others have gone to the mess hall or to sleep. You stay, looking at the map. The faint pencil smudges tell a story no one else will see. Where you lost the stars, where the GE signal vanished, where you chose one direction over another and hoped you'd chosen right. You trace them slowly, fingertip over the paper, each correction, each curve the marks of decisions made in silence. It occurs to you then that precision, the thing you're trained to worship, has its own kind of terror. Because the closer you measure, the more you see the smallness of what you can truly know. The RAF manual says, navigation is the art of certainty built from uncertainty. You used to think that meant confidence. Now you think it means humility. You glance toward the hangar, where mechanics already swarm over the aircraft. Inspecting engines and fuel lines, the pilots will sleep. The gunners will write letters, but you'll sit at the same desk tomorrow, drawing new lines over another map of another sky. You'll call it navigation. But it's really a kind of faith. Outside, wind moves across the airfield, rattling the thin walls of the hut.
Inside, the only sound is the slow ticking of the wall clock.
Each second marks another distance crossed. You fold the map carefully, place it back in its case. The edges are worn, corners softened by use. You pause for a moment before leaving and whisper to no one in particular. No one looked down, but every line we drew decided who came home. The night began long before the engines started. Inside the Nissen hut, marked Navigation Office, a single bulb hummed over the tables, where men bent over maps drawn in pencil and ink. You were one of them, a navigator with the 8th Air Force, stationed somewhere in East Anglia. January 1944. The air smelled faintly of pencil shavings, rubber erasers, and paraffin heaters that never quite worked. You checked your tools like a ritual. The Dalton E6B flight computer, a circular slide rule of metal and glass. Your stopwatches wound and synchronized. A ruler with chipped edges. A compass that always pointed north, even when you didn't trust the world to do the same. On the wall hung a star chart, not for poetry, but for survival. In the classroom at Matherfield months earlier, you'd learned celestial navigation by measuring the angle of stars like Altair and Deneb against the artificial horizon. In theory, those stars could lead you anywhere. In practice, they were often hidden by the endless grey over Europe. You spread your map open, England, the North Sea, Germany, beyond. You mark the outbound course with a sharp pencil, drawing clean, confident lines, though confidence, you'd learned, was just another form of calculation. At the briefing, the target was announced Schweinfurt again. The room went silent, a silence born of memory. That city was where many never came back, but you didn't flinch. Your work didn't allow for it. Your job wasn't to worry about flak or fighters. Your job was to know precisely, quietly, relentlessly, where you were, even when no one else did. You walked to the aircraft before dawn, maps sealed in a canvas case against the dew. The B-17 loomed like a shadowed cathedral on the tarmac. You climbed through the hatch, ducking under cables and oxygen lines, finding your place in the small compartment just behind the bombardier's glass nose. Your desk was bolted metal, barely wide enough for a map. Beside it, a window no larger than your hand. When the engines turned over, the entire aircraft shuddered. You held your pencil steady anyway, one small act of control in a world that rarely offered any. At 10,000 feet, the intercom crackled. "Navigator, check course," you replied. "Holding 085, wind, drift 1 point left." Every word was routine. Every routine a kind of protection. Through the small window, you could just make out the English coast receding behind a silver mist. The ocean opened ahead, a dark, endless plain. This was where navigation truly began. No landmarks, no lights, only the ticking of watches and the slow hum of calculation. You worked in numbers and angles, heading, drift, variation. You measured wind direction by watching the drift of the sea below through the drift meter, a circular lens pointed straight down, showing how the surface slid beneath you. A few degrees off now would mean miles off later. The airmen trusted that you'd make those degrees right. You checked your stopwatch every 3 minutes, a mark. Every 10, a recalculation. Routine became rhythm. Rhythm became calm at 20,000 feet. The cold began to creep in. Your breath frosted on the mask. Your pencil became brittle in your gloves. But you kept working, tracing each leg of the journey like a surgeon of air and ink. Every few minutes, you compared compass bearings with the radio operator's fixes from ground stations, the GE navigation system.
Still new, still unreliable this far east.
You trusted your charts more than the static in your headset. The others in the crew had their own rituals. The pilot adjusted throttle trim with small, precise movements. The waist gunners checked ammunition, even when there was nothing to see. You, the navigator, looked at the map again and again, as if the act itself kept the world aligned. Celestial navigation was supposed to be your fallback. You had your sextant ready in its foam-lined case, waiting for a break in the clouds. You'd been trained to measure star altitudes, compute intercepts, and correct for precession, all beautiful.
Logical things on a blackboard, but up here,
the sky was never still. The aircraft pitched, the stars wobbled, and even the horizon became a trembling guess. You remembered your instructor's words at Gulfport. A good navigator isn't the one who knows where he is.
He's the one who knows where he isn't. You'd laugh then.
You understood now. At 24,000 feet, the plane leveled off. You ran a final position check. Everything matched, within acceptable error, a few miles at most. You exhaled, slow, careful, and marked the time. For a brief moment, everything felt balanced. Engine steady.
Instruments calm.
The stars faint but visible through the thin air. You raised your sextant toward Vega just to confirm. A perfect reading, clean and sharp. You entered the data into your log, and then, almost imperceptibly, the world began to fade. A thin mist rolled across the glass. At first, you thought it was condensation. Then it thickened, rising into a solid, seamless grey. The stars vanished one by one, like switches flicked off. The horizon disappeared entirely. Even the moon was gone. You looked back at your map, it hadn't changed, but now it felt like fiction. Numbers meant little when the sky offered no guidance. You called over the intercom. Visibility 0. No celestial fix possible. The pilot's voice came back, calm but tight. Understood. We'll trust your chart then. You glanced at your pencil, resting on the map's edge. You'd been trained to navigate by sight and stars, but tonight there was nothing left to see.
Only instruments. Only trust. The engines droned on. The aircraft pressed deeper into the clouds. And you, the man meant to find the way home, stared into the grey and realized the sky had stopped speaking. Clouds roll in.
Stars vanish, the sky offers no guidance now. The cloud cover thickened until it felt like the aircraft was suspended inside a blank page. Outside, there was no horizon, no sun, not even the faint suggestion of distance. Just an endless grey void pressing close against every window. The pilot called out for a course check. You glanced at your instruments, tracing lines and recalculating drift, pretending that the math still connected to the Earth below. It was nearly noon now, though the light had not changed. You had crossed the North Sea hours ago, but there was no coastline, no reference. The B-17's engines maintained their steady vibration, a rhythm that felt more real than the map under your hands. You marked another position estimate at 11:22 a.m. By your reckoning, you should be approaching the Dutch border. But the wind direction had shifted since the last weather report from England, and any change up here meant the difference between safety and wandering. You pulled your oxygen mask tighter, the rubber stiff with cold. Inside the nose compartment, frost was creeping along the rivets. Your breath fogged the glass of your map case as you leaned over to write another note in the log. Every entry mattered: time, heading, airspeed, wind estimate, drift angle, the tiny data points that, when strung together, told the story of where you might be. The pilot's voice came through the intercom again. "Navigator, give me an ETA to IP." You paused, calculating. 14 minutes, assuming we're still on course. The pause after you said it stretched longer than it should have. No one questioned your tone. They never did. There was no shame in uncertainty. Every navigator had stories of getting lost, of trusting compasses that swung wildly near magnetic deviation zones, of clouds that ate landmarks whole. You adjusted the gyro compass, cross-checked with the magnetic one, then took a quick look through the drift meter. Below, nothing. Not even a break in the clouds. You called the radio operator.
"Can you get a fix from the beacons?"
Static filled the line. The GEE receiver crackled faintly thin pulses of light across the cathode screen. You adjusted the dials, watching for the bright bars that would tell you where two signals intersected. But the pattern was weak, fading in and out like the heartbeat of a dying signal. At this range, deep into occupied territory, even the GEE system struggled to hold. "Signal intermittent," came the radio man's reply. You nodded to yourself, though no one could see. You marked the partial fix on your chart, two faint arcs that should have met at a single point but didn't. Instead, they crossed in a wide oval of uncertainty. You penciled an X in the middle.
"Estimated position," you wrote beside it. The intercom was quiet except for the engine hum.
You looked again at the map, trying to imagine what lay beneath the clouds, the small towns of northern Germany, perhaps, or maybe the rivers of Belgium twisting unseen below. You'd studied them in training, the Weser, the Rhine, the Meuse, lines on paper. Now, they might as well have been myths. You leaned back slightly, stretching the cramp from your neck. Your gloves were slick with graphite. The altimeter read 27,000 feet. Outside, the temperature hovered near -40 Celsius. Everything was dry, brittle, and painfully still. You thought of the other crews, each one relying on its own navigator, each drawing invisible lines through the same grey expanse. 1,000 bombers, each trusting a man with a pencil and a watch. The thought was strangely comforting. You weren't alone in your guesswork. At 12:04, you requested a new heading correction. "Pilot, come 2 degrees left. Compensate for wind drift." The reply came instantly. 2 left. The aircraft banked gently. The motion was slow, almost graceful. You watched the compass needle settle again, steady as ever, even though you weren't sure what it pointed toward anymore. You tried the drift meter again, adjusting the focus ring. For a moment, the cloud cover thinned just enough to reveal something below dark streaks, possibly roads, maybe rivers. It was impossible to tell. Then the white mist folded back over them, and they were gone. You reached for the stopwatch, marking another 10-minute leg. According to your dead reckoning, you were now over the German interior. But according to the static in your headset, you might have been anywhere. Dead reckoning, the phrase always sounded grimly appropriate. It meant travelling by time and direction alone, multiplying airspeed by elapsed time, adjusting for drift, assuming everything you couldn't see still existed where you'd left it. It was logic in the absence of sight, faith in arithmetic. You checked your chart again, eyes moving across the penciled routes. The original line, the one from briefing, was still clear, crisp and wrong. Too direct. The wind had been stronger than forecast. The barometric pressure had shifted. If you stayed on that line, you'd overshoot, or undershoot. The difference didn't matter much in math, but in reality, it meant hundreds of miles. You sharpened your pencil and began another line, a correction. Angle offset, 12 degrees. Time correction, plus 9 minutes. It was an adjustment built on hope, but hope was part of navigation too. You marked it carefully, then checked your watch again. 12:31. The target time was approaching, yet the clouds remained unbroken. The bombardier was already preparing his station, calibrating the Norden bomb site, waiting for landmarks that weren't there. You felt a faint pressure in your chest, not panic, just the weight of guessing. You knew the procedure. If visibility failed completely, they would bomb by radar, but radar, too, was only as precise as your last known fix. And that fix was somewhere between probably and maybe. You glanced out the small side window again. A brief gap opened in the clouds. Through it, you saw something fields, maybe frozen and snow-dusted, but no cities, no rivers, no shapes you could name. The gap closed again before you could take a bearing. You logged another note, visibility intermittent, position uncertain, continuing course. Somewhere behind you, one of the waist gunners said over the intercom that he could see nothing but cloud. Someone else replied that it looked the same in every direction. You smiled faintly. That was true and somehow reassuring. At least no one else could tell how lost you might be. You ran through your training again in your head. If lost, you were to maintain heading, .crosscheck, compass with gyro attempt, GAE or radio fix every 10 minutes, avoid overcorrection, trust. Your log. You'd written those steps in the margin of your notebook months.
They were smudged now, but still legible.
You followed them like prayer. The GEE receiver flickered once more.
A faint pulse.
Then another. You turned the dial gently until the signals brightened into something readable. At last, a partial fix. The 2 bars crossed near Osnabrück, or maybe near Liege. You squinted at the scale. The uncertainty ellipse was still too wide. 200 miles of margin. You sighed through the mask, the sound lost in the hum of oxygen. The pilot called again. Navigator, how close are we to target? You looked down at the map. The lines, the compass roses, the notations, they were all still there, neat and confident. But the sky above them had erased everything. You pressed your pencil against the map. Hesitating, you drew a single, thin line, a new course, slanting slightly southward. It intersected none of the old ones. It was a path through uncertainty. You labeled it simply estimated new heading. You didn't know if it led to Schweinfurt or somewhere else entirely, perhaps Belgium, perhaps home, but it was a direction, and that was enough. The intercom clicked once more, faint beneath the static.
Copy, navigator.
Following your course, the plane adjusted slightly, banking again into the grey. You watched the compass needle settle on its new bearing. It held steady.
Unwavering, as if sure of itself. You weren't sure at all, but you drew another mark,
recorded the time, and turned the page in your logbook. Somewhere,
unseen beneath you, Europe stretched out in silence. Clouds hid the land.
and the land hid the truth. The sky above remained pale, featureless, indifferent. You kept working anyway, not because you knew the way, but because someone had to. He draws a new line across the chart, unsure if they're even over Germany or Belgium. The engines had been silent for nearly an hour now, and the sound of them still echoed faintly in your ears. That soft, hollow hum, a vibration that seemed to live in the bones even after landing, had finally faded into nothing. In its place was only the still air of the debriefing room and the faint ticking of a wall clock that never hurried for anyone. You sat at a long wooden table, the map still spread open before you. It looked tired now, as if it had flown the mission too, edges curled, grid lines softened by damp gloves and pencil dust. The red and blue pencil marks crossed one another like veins, evidence of the journey that, by all logic, shouldn't have worked. You leaned closer. Every 10-minute leg, every estimated fix, every correction, it was all there. Your handwriting was smaller near the end, the letters crowded by fatigue. It was a strange thing to study something that had once felt so urgent, now motionless and harmless beneath a quiet lamp. Someone walked past, boots thudding softly on the floorboards. The crew were being dismissed one by one, still half deaf, half awake. The pilot had given his report already. Navigation held steady despite limited visibility, he had said. You weren't sure whether he believed it or not. You reached into your flight bag and pulled out the small RAF navigation manual, the one they had issued in training. The cover was worn thin, the title barely visible, Notes on Air Navigation 1942 edition. Inside, the pages were marked with pencil brackets and smudged fingerprints. On one page, a line you'd underlined long ago. A navigator must never assume he is lost, only that he has not yet found himself. You smiled faintly at that. It had sounded poetic during training, a motto almost. But after today, it felt more like a quiet joke shared between those who knew better. You looked back at the map. By your post-mission analysis, you had been off course for at least 30 miles before correcting. Yet somehow, the formation had reached the target area within the planned time window. You'd drawn a new line mid-air, trusting it blindly, and it had been just enough. Just enough, that phrase lingered in your head. In navigation, there was no applause for perfection. Only relief for approximation. If you were close enough for the bombs to fall where they were supposed to, close enough for the radio beacon to pick you up on the way home, that was victory. A quiet, mathematical kind of victory. You unrolled another chart, the return leg, England to Europe and back again. Thin, dotted lines traced the route across the North Sea. You followed them with a gloved finger, remembering each segment of silence that had filled the aircraft on the way home. After the bomb doors had closed, after the turn north, after the clouds swallowed the horizon again. No one had spoken for almost an hour. No one had needed to. It was strange how loud silence could be at altitude. You could hear every click of a dial, every sigh in the intercom, every rustle of chart paper. Even the hum of the drift meter became its own kind of metronome. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the realization that every line you drew, every correction you made, might be the difference between landfall and open sea. And yet, you drew them with a pencil that could break at any moment. Back in training, the instructors had said, navigation is precision built on assumption. You hadn't believed them then. But now, with the day behind you and the map spread out like a confession, it made perfect sense. One of the debriefing officers stopped at your table. Good work up there, he said quietly. You nodded, unsure whether it was praise or routine. He looked down at your chart, tracing the route with a finger. You corrected your heading here? You nodded again. Right before the IP, clouds were solid. He grunted in acknowledgement. Well, whatever you did, it worked. Everyone made it back. Then he moved on, leaving you alone with the silence again. That was the measure of success. Everyone made it back. You'd seen maps where the return line stopped halfway across the sea.
No marks, no notes, just an unfinished line that ended somewhere in the white margin.
You never asked about those. You began to tidy your table, folding the maps, cleaning the pencils, aligning your instruments in their case. It was a ritual of sorts. You did it slowly, carefully, as if precision now could make up for all the imprecision up there. Each tool had its place: compass, protractor, parallel ruler, stopwatch. Each one slightly worn, edges dulled by time and frost. Outside, the evening light had dimmed to a grey-blue haze. The airfield lights blinked in steady intervals, guiding in the last of the stragglers. You could hear engines far off, a low thrum fading behind the hangars. The smell of fuel hung in the air sharp, metallic, familiar. You turned the map over, running your thumb along the creases. There were faint impressions where your pencil had pressed too hard, invisible lines etched into the paper like ghosts of calculations. Each one represented a choice, a turn taken, a correction made, a decision that could never be perfectly tested. You couldn't see the ground, but you had believed in the numbers, and somehow that had been enough. You thought about the phrase the older navigators used to say in the mess hall: "No one ever looks down." Not really? They were right. You'd flown hundreds of miles without once seeing what lay beneath the clouds. Cities, fields, rivers, all reduced to coordinates and bearings. It wasn't detachment, it was survival. To look down was to remember what those coordinates represented. The manual on the table caught your eye again. You turned to the back pages, the appendices filled with formulas and correction tables, wind triangle calculations, pressure altitude charts, magnetic deviation tables, the hidden architecture behind every successful return. Each one was exact, beautiful in its way, a quiet geometry that promised order in a sky that offered none. You picked up your pencil once more, out of habit, and drew a small triangle in the margin, the classic wind triangle you'd drawn 1,000 times in training. Heading, track, wind, 3 lines meeting at uncertain angles, yet together forming the path home. You stared at it for a long time, realizing that this simple shape had carried entire crews through storms, darkness, and silence. You closed the manual and exhaled. The debriefing room was almost empty now. Someone laughed softly in the corridor, the sound fading quickly into the hum of distant generators. Outside, night had fully settled over the base. You stood, gathering your maps. The flight log would be filed, the maps reissued, the pencils resharpened. Tomorrow, another briefing would begin in the same room, over a fresh chart. New lines would be drawn, new uncertainties plotted, and, somewhere, another navigator would sit in the same quiet afterward, tracing back the invisible path he'd just survived. You rolled the map tightly and slipped it into its case. The paper crackled softly, a small, satisfying sound. Then you turned out the lamp, leaving the table bare, except for the faint imprint of your last calculation. As you stepped outside, the night was still. No wind.
No movement, only the steady glow of the airfield lights stretching into the dark. You stopped once, looking up at the sky.
It was clear now, stars sharp and countless, the kind you'd begged for earlier in the day when the clouds had swallowed them. They seemed calm, almost indifferent, as if to remind you that precision and chance had always shared the same sky. You adjusted your cap, turned toward the barracks, and walked into the silence. No one looked down, but every line we drew decided who came home.